Good morning, colleagues
Good morning.
and staff. We're in April. Happy April. Time is now 8 o'clock. We have a quorum, so we're going to get the Committee on Appointments started. The first item today is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Elizabeth Sear to the Housing Appeals Board. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. So Ms. Sear has been recommended by staff and approved by the mayor for appointment here. Are there any additional comments or questions on this item?
Madam Chair, I'll just note, I think this takes us then to 2 openings for this Housing Appeals Board. Is that correct, Daniel?
Believe so. Yes, there are the 2 additional alternate seats on this board.
Great. So that's nice to get one of those knocked off.
Absolutely. Anything else? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries. Second item today is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Ben Goey to the Uptown Business Improvement District Board. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Thank you. Moved and supported. So this is a new vacancy once I resigned to join Southtown CIA and Commissioner Moody's in light of his absence. So this is to get representation from the commission back on Uptown bid and then the next item for the Uptown CIA. Any additional questions here? All in favor?
Aye.
It carries. Item 3, a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Ben Goey to the Uptown Corridor Improvement Authority. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Kind of same vein of comments that I just shared. Anything else? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
It carries. Item number 4 is a resolution confirming Mayor Bliss's appointment of Darrell Ross to the Southtown Corridor Improvement Authority. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Thank you. Moved and supported. This is a reappointment. There's been delayed a little bit because of the vetting and having a lot of folks in the queue, but we're excited to have Mr. Ross back joining that board. He brings a really important voice there. Any additional comments or questions? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It carries. Item 5 is a resolution recognizing the Mobile GR Commission's appointment of Laura Sessa to the Vital Streets Oversight Commission. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. So Ms. Sessa is going to be the Mobile GR representative for that commission, and she'll be replacing a recent resignation. Any additional comments or questions for this item? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
It carries. Item number 6, a resolution recognizing the Grand Rapids School Systems appointment of Brandy Mitchell to the Smart Zone Local Development Finance Authority. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. So GRPS has a kind of a set seat on this board, and Dr. Mitchell has been selected by Dr. Roby, the GRPS superintendent, for their appointment. Any additional comments or questions? Okay, thank you to Daniel and Commissioner Yasasi for kind of moving that along. I know it took a few months of conversation that started last year when you were still serving as chair. So thank you I'm excited to see that filled. If there's no more questions or comments for that item, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It carries. The last item on our agenda today is our vacancy list. I think Commissioner Yasasi asked about the Affordable Housing Fund Board, so we see that here. Anything else of note that you might want to review or comment on or have any discussion on?
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
So we just appointed Ms. Mitchell to GRPS for the Smart Zone Authority, and I think the last meeting we did Mr. Eatman as well.
Mr. Eamon's appointment is forthcoming.
Okay.
He's still being vetted.
Okay, thank you. And then, so then that really leaves, I believe, the urban forestry
Can you go down, Joe?
and
Thank you.
also Parks and Rec, where there is a GRPS liaison.
Farmers Market.
Farmers, giving us eclipse brain. So urban agriculture as well as Parks and Rec, I believe, still have one opening each respective for GRPS. And I know that, just a reminder to all of us, those were shared with Ms. Mitchell as the liaison as the deputy superintendent. So Daniel, I think, may I suggest that if we don't hear, once Mr. Eatman moves forward, and then if we could go back and circle to them to see if they have identified those 2 openings. I know we'll get here to the end of the school year, but then hopefully they can continue to be considered.
That sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
Thank you,
then-
Commissioner. Anything else?
For the City Planning Commission, I know at the last meeting, Ms. Chair, we talked about one of the members who was going off, and then it looks like, so is this a second opening that has come up since we've last met, or am I just not remembering that there was 2 openings at that time?
Correct. There's the opening that we previously had, and then there was, I believe Ms. Wallace was the one that just recently resigned.
Okay,
due to family
okay, I couldn't
issues.
remember where that one was at. So I know that we had received some feedback, and the mayor had received that feedback as well about moving some individuals forward. So I don't know if we need to circle back and have a conversation with her, or?
I've actually talked with the mayor.
Okay, good, okay.
I think like 2 weeks ago, last time we were
Okay.
here, about that. And so we have some few names.
Okay.
We've heard from some folks who are interested, who have relevant background, and can bring some more representation to that body. So that's in motion.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
And that was for the Planning Commission, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I know when we were at Commission Night Out, we had a couple people express to me that they wanted some more First Ward representation. I can't remember if this one individual was a recent appointment, but some people were under the impression that there wasn't First Ward representation. So I'm just curious if any of those individuals who express interest are from the First Ward.
I know one of them is from the 3rd. The other person, I'm not sure, but we can vet that. I think too, the other feedback that I've heard is this body, if we go back to the list that has the, oh, there it is. There's really no racial and ethnic representation here, or diversity here, so that's a big concern that I've heard from community members. This is a really, really important body, so we need to make sure it truly represents the city, both geographically, but also culturally and racially. So I think these are all things that we need to weigh when we think about filling these 2 vacancies. Thank you for that comment. Any other comments or questions or vacancies that you all would like to discuss this morning?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just one more item. I think I saw there's a vacancy for Blandford Nature Center. I believe it was under Urban Ag or Urban Forestry. I'm trying to remember.
Urban Ag.
Okay, Urban Ag. I'm curious if there's any contact that's been made there, and if not, I'm happy to reach out to.
I haven't been in contact. I wonder if city staff have been.
Yeah, that was more so where I was curious if anyone, or if you've received any interest from anybody there.
Yeah, I believe that capacity was quite thin for them as well, but I can get in touch with them to make sure they know that their appointment is vacant and that they can provide a name.
Okay, thank you.
Specifically to Blandford Nature Center, is that what I heard? Okay, thank you. Great, so that's urban ag, smart zone, housing, planning. Any others of note this morning? All right, wonderful. Thank you for your work. Time's 8:08, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We'll call the Fiscal Committee to order here at 8:30. And the first item on the agenda this morning is a resolution authorizing a grant agreement between the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy and the City of Grand Rapids for reimbursement of $23,331 for a lead awareness toolkit.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Jernberg, good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. The item that we have today, so the state of Michigan in 2018 developed a State Drinking Water Advisory Council. That organization or that appointment committee was given money through the state budget a few years back and to help promote awareness about lead in drinking water. There was some money left over in that process that they have, and they've been giving out what we call mini grants to communities that are required to have local water advisory council. Grand Rapids is one of those councils, and we've been thankful that we're eligible for this $23,000 grant. The purpose that we're hoping to use this money for is to basically create little, I'll call them swag bags, toolkits that help people understand the importance, of protecting themselves, being aware of the risk of potential lead in the drinking water. And while we don't have issues in Grand Rapids with our treatment and so forth, it does make them aware that they can filter their water if they are concerned. If you do have filters, one of the things that we will have in these swag bags is basically a magnet that will go on the refrigerators that will allow people to remind themselves when they should replace their filters and things like that. It'll remind people to flush, clean their aerators out on their faucets, and there will be other handouts that go with it. The money that we're getting will be going to these swag bags, these toolkits, which starting off, we plan to have about 3,000 of them to start off that we'll be handing out at various local events.
Very good. Colleagues, questions for Mr. Jernberg? All right. Hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item 2 is our bid list resolution for April 9, 2024.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Ms. Claren, got 11 items this morning.
Yeah, just 12 items this morning. If there are any specific questions, myself or our purchasing agents here.
Colleagues, questions, comments? I just want to say I'm appreciative of number 5 on there, and Next Step of West Michigan. Appreciate their continued help to support our cleanliness efforts. All right. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 3 is our Comptroller's warrant report for the period March 6, 2024 through March 26, 2024, in the amount of $38 million, and the monthly travel and funds report. Mr. Comptroller.
Good morning, Commissioners. A few reports here this morning. For the first one with the warrant report, for the reference period, we released cash payments totaling approximately $38.2 million. That includes just under $10.6 million for our employee payroll expense and $1.48 million for income tax warrants. In terms of quantity, 14,101 income tax refunds were issued and 1,867 checks and electronic payments were issued. And as always, on the following pages, we have a table of all checks and payments that were issued that exceeded the amount of $20,000. Also, we have our February fiscal year-to-date travel report. So this is summarizing travel spend by city department for the first 8 months of the fiscal year. And this report is showing that so far we have spent just under $1.1 million on an overall budget of around $2.9 million, or about 37% of that overall budget. And then lastly, we also have our February fiscal year-to-date monthly funds report. This report provides an accounting and high-level summary of some of the drivers of revenues and expenditures and some key city funds. And we make this report available on the City Comptroller, City of Grand Rapids website for the public to see, and anyone who's interested in getting a little bit more insight on some of these drivers behind city financial activity. So that report is out there and available. And those are all the reports I have for you this morning.
Very good. Colleagues, questions for the Comptroller? All right, hearing none, those reports will be received and filed. And our final item on the agenda is our Treasurer's Report for the period March 6, 2024 through March 26, 2024.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
With our report today, I'm going to start off with the fact that we have $594 million at this point in time, earning over 3%, 3.07. It's actually earning more than that. This is actually what we purchased the coupon at, but it's actually earning closer to 5% for our yield right now. Showing a couple of graphs here just on how projections have changed really drastically from December to March of the Fed's thinking. We also had a tragedy with the collapse of the ship striking the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. Those are the types of events that you're talking about a major shipping port, and you're talking about how many industries now are impacted, not just the longshoremen that are actually working there, but we're talking about a major shipment of vehicles that go out of that area. Those types of events are ones that would trigger or postpone any type of economic change in our economy other than for the downside. Similar to where we had the boat that was stuck sideways in the Suez Canal a few years back. Same when we had issues out on the West Coast with striking longshoremen and delaying shipments out of the West Coast ports. Those are all factors that will continue to put pressure on keeping inflation up there, the delivery of goods and services. The market right now is in such a kind of a quandary right now because they're getting all these mixed results. They're getting great GDP numbers at 2.1%, but that's going to keep inflation high. You're seeing these job reports that are coming out that are, the Fed is looking to have jobs kind of tighten and here we're hiring and hiring and hiring. And so you're still seeing wages are still up there, wages are still increasing. And so all these types of things are in the mixed bag of the economy are not going to show inflation decreasing as quickly as they anticipated. And so now when market participants in early January were thinking there'd be 6 rate cuts, the Fed's saying, no, we might get to 3, and now they're thinking there might not be any this year. And that was the big thing that hit the stock market last week. We saw the stock market plunge about 1,000 points over a few days was because here's the Fed with their comments in different presentations that they give saying, we might even have to have another rate hike. And so as soon as that type of turmoil hits the market, you see the markets respond very quickly. I just think that right now we're in that, we're all waiting. We're waiting to see what that crystal ball is going to somehow clear up. Are we going to have a smooth glide path to a soft landing, or are we going to have more turmoil? Those are the things that we're faced with right now, and those are the things that will put pressure on the work we do to bond, issue debt, pay off debt. But what we also wanted to do is say, look, we always say we have $594 million. A lot of questions come up with that going, well, why can't you do X, Y, and Z? Well, some of those funds are limited. So one of the graphs we put on our report are the major fund groups that we have in the city and what the cash balance or investable balances are in those funds, just so we can show the graphic and the picture that this isn't all just money in a bank account that we can spend on large projects, because the funds are committed to those dollars are committed to those specific funds. And so we really wanted to put that out there just to show that a lot of different groups have money that we've invested and they're earning the interest off of that, but it can only be used for their operations.
Very good. Colleagues, questions for the treasurer? All right. Hearing none, that report will be received and filed. And with that, we'll conclude fiscal at 8:38. Thank you, everyone.
right, good morning, colleagues. It is approximately 9:15, so we'll go ahead and get this Community Development Committee meeting underway. First and foremost, welcome to brand new, freshly minted Commissioner Goey. Welcome to this body. We're happy to have you here and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Absolutely. All right, we've got 18 items on our agenda today, so I'm going to try and run a pretty tight ship. So we'll just jump right in. Resolution number 1 is a resolution approving option agreements in the eventual sale of 609 Lincoln Avenue Northwest, 749 Sherman Street Southeast, 1030 Helen Street Northeast, and 546 Neyland Avenue Southeast pursuant to City Commission Policy 900-63. Can I get a motion?
So move.
Moved and supported. We got Mr. Klooster on this one.
Thank you. Good morning. So these are, this again is a resolution. We seem to be here every other week with additional requests to approve option agreements to sell property that is owned by the State Land Bank Authority, but the disposition of those properties is directed by the city and pursuant to the commission policy that was adopted last year. So we have 4 more properties that we're requesting approval for the option agreements and then the eventual sale. 2 of these are existing homes that have been condemned, and 2 are vacant lots. 2 of them would be rehabilitated for affordable home ownership. Those are the existing properties. And then 2 of them would be new construction of single-family homes that would be rented at market rates. So all those conditions meet the requirements of the policy, and we would be looking for your approval this morning.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Resolution number 2 is a resolution setting Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024 at 7 p.m. as the date of the public hearing for the City Commission to sit as Board of Review to hear appeals on Special Assessment Nuisance Rule 8784.
Supported.
Moved and supported. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm Paula Jastifer. I'm the city assessor. And the nuisance rule was determined to be a necessity back in January. And so the assessor's office sent out over 1,900 notices on March the 15th. And this public hearing is to hear appeals before the city commission. And that'll be the last date to file an appeal.
Great, thanks. Any questions on that one, colleagues? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Similarly, resolution number 3 is a resolution setting Tuesday, May 7th, 2024 at 2 p.m. as the date of the public hearing for the City Commission to sit as a Board of Review to hear appeals on Special Assessment Rule 8786 for the Uptown Business Improvement District.
Supported.
Moved and supported.
So this is a public hearing to hear appeals on the special assessment for the Uptown Business Improvement District. That plan was approved back in 2022. It was a 3-year plan, so this will be the last year of that plan. And we mailed out notices on March the 29th. And then the May 7th will be the last date to hear appeals on those special assessments.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues?
Nope.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Resolution number 4 is a resolution scheduling a public hearing for Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024 to consider renaming Fairbank Street from Bond Avenue, proposed to be vacated to Ionia Avenue as Corwell Drive.
So move.
Supported.
Moved and supported. We've got Mr. Berkman.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. We have received a request from Corwell Health to consider this renaming. It's a 2-block segment of Fairbanks west of Ionia, and it ends where the portion of Bond that Commission has previously consented to be vacated at the western limits. The road leads into Corwell's Center for Transformation and Innovation campus in the Monroe North area, and Corwell also owns properties along both sides of this particular segment. So the resolution before you is just setting the public hearing to take place for consideration of this at your 7 p.m. meeting on April 23rd. And just also want to recognize that Mr. Alex Pitt is here today, the Real Estate Services Manager for Corwell Health, just on behalf of this item and available should there be any questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions, colleagues?
No.
Nope. Hearing none. All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. Resolution number 5 is a resolution approving a construction agreement in the amount of $25,400 and accepting 2 public utilities easements for Hope Village PRD.
So move.
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Berkman.
So this is one of three construction agreements related to private development on your agenda today. This one in particular will facilitate construction of public sanitary sewer and water main to 16 single-family homes being developed by Mel Trotter Ministries. Project's located west of Jefferson between Garden Street and Fair Street. And so seeking your approval of the construction agreement, that basically outlines that the infrastructure that will be accepted by the cities will be installed per our specs and standards, and also covers our costs associated with inspection, plan review, and administration of the efforts. Per the terms of the agreement, the developer will provide a deposit of $25,400 that goes into an escrow account that we can draw against, and anything unused is then returned to the developer. And then finally, with this item, seeking acceptance of 2 public utilities easements that will give the city rights to maintain those sewer and water mains.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? I just have one question. I know I had the chance to go out and visit and hear some updates from them. Do you know off the top of your head approximately what the cost portion will be from their end?
For installation of the utilities, no, we would have that info, and I'd have to get that to you. I mean, typically the escrow amount is set on a roughly 10% or so of what the construction value would be, so that may give you an approximation. But I'd want to double check that.
Okay, sure.
I can send that to you.
No worries. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. Resolution number 6 is a resolution approving a construction agreement and accepting a public utilities easement for the reserve at Nat Bluff.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported.
This private development includes 39 single-family units in Grand Rapids Charter Township, located south of Knapp and west of Grand River Drive. This development to be served with public water main. So again, asking for your approval similarly to the last item of the construction agreement, and also acceptance of a utilities easement.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. Resolution number 7 is a resolution approving a construction agreement and accepting a public utilities easement for Tallman Woods PUD.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported.
This private development includes 11 condominium buildings, 22 dwelling units total, located in Walker, south of Lake Michigan Drive, west of Cummings Avenue. This one to be served with both sanitary sewer and water of the city's utilities. So again, asking your approval of the construction agreement and acceptance of the utilities easement.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. Resolution number 8 is a resolution awarding a contract with Kenwood Excavating Incorporated for Town and Country in the amount of $617,475, with a total amount not to exceed $897,478.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported.
Now, this item, and as well as 6 others coming up on your agenda, award construction contracts. So I thought it might be appropriate to take a moment just to talk through the costs that you're seeing and how they're derived. In particular, you'll notice each item awards a construction contract, and that contract value is listed. But then there's also a not to exceed total project cost at the end of it. And that not to exceed amount typically covers items like design costs, property acquisition, any legal fees, administration of the project, as well as contingency. And that's reflected each time in a sources and uses kind of summary table that you'll see at the back end. For design, there's typically a 14 to 17% of the total project costs assigned to that, whether it's the engineering department designing in-house or consultants. When we're administering a project designed by consultants, we also cover our department's time with an administration fee, and that's because the engineering department's an internal service fund, and so we operate through a billable rate model that also allows us to directly link the costs of any services to where the project is located, and it depreciates those costs over the life of the asset. Also, you'll notice there's contingencies listed with each project. Most commonly, those are set at 12%, but they do vary. Sometimes on very large, high-dollar projects that are well-defined, we can lower that amount. That helps on occasions to fit within department budgets, but also still provides a significant dollar sum to address any unforeseen conditions that may show up over the course of the project. And then sometimes on smaller projects, we expand that contingency. One example is coming up with the fire station roofing project, where it's a very small dollar amount. Bids came in extremely well, and so we are increasing the contingency percentage to allow us to do some more work over the scope of that project. But just wanted to kind of talk through, that's what you'll see on 7 upcoming items, but in particular, item 8 deals with Town and Country, and this is a familiar project to you because we brought easements on a number of occasions in preparation for this work, which will provide a separate metered water service to each business located within this strip mall. Previously, this development was part of an annexation that took place in the 1960s, and the entire building had been fed off of one water service, the owners having to split the bill. We received 4 bids on March 11th. Kentwood Excavating provided that low bid of $617,475. That was slightly over the engineer's estimate, about $581,000. So seeking your approval of the award to Kentwood for that low bid amount, and again, the not to exceed amount of $897,478 covers those costs of easement acquisitions that we've previously brought before you, the design, the construction inspection, and other construction phase services, our administration, and contingencies, and that funding will come from the Water System Fund.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing none, just a quick comment on this one in particular. I know part of why I think I was asking about Hope Village, I know, I'm just curious to understand, I guess, sort of the rhyme or reason or our approach to when the city helps fund certain projects pertaining to city infrastructure for, some areas or some projects and developments as opposed to others. I guess, could you color that in a little bit for us?
Yeah, so this project in particular is seeking to address a legacy issue, kind of one that was inherited because of the way the development occurred and prior to it being in the city. Typical development, when it occurs, it's the responsibility of the developer to install the new infrastructure, the new utilities, the new roads that are servicing that development, and that's on their cost. But this one is fixing, I think, a legacy issue, and I see Water System Manager Jernberg coming to help fill in that a little bit further.
Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Yeah, as Tim mentioned, this is fixing a legacy issue, and per the water system rules and regulations, in the city and within our system, there are situations where you have multiple properties on one parcel that are served. And in our rules and regs, don't ask me the specific date, it's before my time, but any property that was served with water and sewer service prior to 1983 that had multiple buildings served by a single service are allowed to continue that way. Following 1983, each property and building is required to have its own separate water and sanitary sewer lateral. In this situation, these properties existed prior to 1983, and in our rules and regs, it states that there's no separation required unless there's 1, a service leak or service issue, or 2, a billing dispute. In the situation with Town and Country, you had one property owner that was essentially paying for all 10 properties. They stopped paying the bill when the property owner died, and basically accumulated a $20,000 bill with a lot of finger pointing happening at that time. So we're extending the public utility for public purposes. We're looping a water main in this process and then stubbing individual services to the properties. One thing that Tim didn't mention is we are going to recoup some of the money that's listed here through plumbing improvements that have to be made to isolate each of the properties from each other.
Got it. I appreciate the context. I think I've just had a few conversations with people, I think, working specifically nonprofits in the affordable housing space. And I think oftentimes, they're able to raise funds on the private side for, the housing portion, but then to front a large sum of a cost to help with city infrastructure, I think, can be difficult and isn't always the most attractive thing to go back to your donors and ask for additional money for. So that's just kind of where my thought was going, but I appreciate the information on that. All right, hearing no other questions or comments, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. Resolution number 9 is a resolution awarding a contract with Fishbeck for the comprehensive master plan update for the Grand Rapids Metropolitan Area Water, Sewer, and Stormwater Services 2025 in the amount of $1,448,500.
Or the city completed the original comprehensive master plan that provided planning information for the growth of our water distribution system and our wastewater collection system, as well as our treatment system, while continuing to meet the required state and federal standards that we have to abide by. The update before you will provide estimates of existing and future water and sewer demand, projections on the remaining useful life of facilities, and identification of future facilities that will be required related to our utilities over the 20-year planning period. Plans required to be updated every 5 years, and that's happened in 2010, 2015, and 2020. So now we're on that 5-year cycle of needing to do so again. Just noting in 2020, we did expand it to incorporate planning for stormwater as well. And so the work will also include identifying projects and producing documentation associated with anticipated fiscal 26 projects that could be funded under the Drinking Water Revolving Fund and the associated principal forgiveness that we're eligible to get under that program. So that's a significant scope item as well. And again, this is for our greater area, including our customer communities that are served by city utilities as well. We received proposals on March 7th, and we're recommending that the project be awarded to Fishbeck, and that total not to exceed of $1,679,000. Again, includes their fee plus some contingency for any scope we need to expand, financing coming from the water, sewer, and stormwater funds.
Great, thank you. And just to add as a comment, we do this practice as a best practice, not because there's specific concerns about our water sewer infrastructure. And I know we had some events as of recently pertaining to that, but this is part of a planned process and not as a direct response to that. So.
Yeah, it's part of good asset management planning, knowing what's out there, knowing what's expected as development occurs, as upsizing needed. So it's a proactive measure.
Yep, thank you. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that carries. Resolution number 10 is a resolution approving an increase of $102,233 for improvements to Sullivan Field for a total not to exceed $1,302,233.
Support.
Moved and supported.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
The Sullivan Field renovation project is well underway, and during construction, it was discovered that there was not proper foundation footing initially poured with this stadium grandstand that was built many years ago, and so there was a requirement for some structural backfill to be put in to shore up this structure temporarily while the renovation project continues on this. So, and that is the cost of this increase and is being fully funded by the Parks Millage.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing none, I've driven past it a few times and the construction looks like it's going really well. It's very exciting, so appreciate it.
Yep.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, it carries. Resolution number 11 is a resolution awarding an agreement with EV Construction Company for pre-construction services for Kendall Fire Station construction in the amount of $15,230 for a total amount not to exceed $546,930.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Berkman?
So we went through a qualifications-based selection process to solicit and evaluate firms to provide construction management services in association with the construction of this new fire station that will be located at the corner of Kendall and Kalamazoo in the 3rd Ward. The team selected EV Construction as the highest ranked qualified firm. EV has subsequently submitted a proposal for pre-construction services, so that will help as having an advisor during the design process and providing cost estimating services. Their services in the amount of $15,230. Again, the not to exceed amount being a significantly higher number of $546,930 rolls into it what was previously approved back in October of last year, just always reflecting the total project costs as we advance these projects. That $529,870 covered design services that were awarded to integrated architecture, and that work is underway. So funding will come from the Capital Improvement Fund, and that's funneling through the $35 million grant that was received through the state.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments, colleagues? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Item number 12 is a resolution awarding a contract with C&I Building Maintenance Incorporated for Kalamazoo, Leonard, and Colville Fire Stations roof restoration in the amount of $203,746 with a total amount not to exceed $304,855.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported.
So the flat roofs at these 3 fire stations have reached the end of their useful life and will be replaced with a system that provides a 20-year warranty along with other flashing and coping work to be done along the roof lines at each location. Received 4 bids, and C&I Building Maintenance provided that low bid amount of $203,746, which was under the engineer's estimate of $308,000. Seeking your approval to award the contract to C&I and also your authorization of expenditures not to exceed $304,855. As I alluded to earlier, we increased the contingencies on this project in particular to 20% since prices came in so well that we may be able to include some other upgrades that were being looked at for each site. Financing will come from the facilities management line item of the Capital Improvement Fund.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments, colleagues? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. Item number 13 is a resolution awarding a contract with Basin Electric Company for various parking ramps LED lighting upgrades in the amount of $38,521 with a total amount not to exceed $98,695.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported.
So we've been working with Mobile GR to upgrade exterior lighting at 4 parking ramps to LED, the Pearl Ionia ramp, Ottawa Fulton, Western Commerce, and the Monroe Center ramp. 3 bids were received for the project. Basin submitted the low bid of $38,521 under the estimate of approximately $54,000. So seeking your approval of the award to Basin with total expenditures not to exceed $98,695 coming from the parking system fund.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Hearing none, all those, oh, go for it.
Mr. Berkman, is this part of the city's total plan to change all the lighting to LED lighting? Is this all part of this?
Yeah, and a number of the ramps have already been upgraded. This is kind of coming through and taking care of these. Are these the last 4 that have not had the exterior lighting upgraded thus far?
Yeah, it's just the exterior. About 5 or 6 years ago, we implemented or we did LED lighting in the interior of all of the parking ramps. And so these 4, for whatever reason, the exterior lighting didn't get retrofitted to LED. So this is just completing that LED conversion.
Thank you.
But there's also a significant street lighting project underway that you may be referring to as well, where we're going through and replacing all city streetlights to LED as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Commissioner. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Item number 14 is a resolution awarding a contract with CL Trucking and Excavating LLC for Burger Goodwood Neighborhood Phase 2 water main in the amount of $5,626,738.50 with a total amount not to exceed $7,133,400 and approving a cost-sharing agreement with Cascade Charter Township DWRF Loan 7785-01.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported.
So this is the second phase of a project in Cascade Township that's installing new water main and in particular bringing 214 new water services to address detected PFAS contamination by connecting residents in that area to the city's public water system. 7 bids were received on March 12th. Again, CL Trucking providing that low bid of just over $5.6 million. That's under our engineer's estimate of approximately $6 million. So the resolution before you, again, seeking to award that contract to CL. The total not to exceed budget for the project of $7,133,400 will come from the state's drinking water revolving fund and the water system fund. Worth noting that it's anticipated that the water system will receive an estimated principal forgiveness of up to $6.9 million for this project through the bipartisan infrastructure law DWSRF emerging contaminants grant.
Great. Any questions, colleagues? Yes,
Mr. Berkman, when you receive these kinds of contracts or ask for RFQs for these contracts, and you are in partnership with Cascade Charter Township, who makes the decision on which vendor receives the contract?
So we're ultimately the ones administering the contract, but of course, we're working in close partnership with Cascade, so we coordinate with them and have their review. But we're the ones that are making the award recommendation, and you as City Commission are the ones approving that contract. So it's ultimately routed through our legal department, signed by the mayor as contracts are, but we work in close cooperation with our neighboring community and the Custer community of Cascade.
The reason I ask is because I know from the city side, we're very committed to the equity side of any of these contracts that are being let out. And I just wondered if Cascade Charter Township has the same kind of value systems that then allows us to work in a collaborative manner with them.
Yeah. So the city has, first of all, we issue the awards to the lowest and most responsive bidder. So we look first at low bid, but then also qualifications. The city also has an MLBE, or micro local business enterprise program, that I'm sure you're familiar with, that seeks to incentivize use of smaller businesses, smaller firms. We cannot utilize that program or that incentive when we're utilizing special funding like this case with the DWRF loans, but we do consider that in when we're awarding projects with certainly local funds. And again, we're the ones, we the city are the ones that ultimately make the recommendation on who the award is given.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for the information. Good question, Commissioner. Just from my understanding too, these two amounts listed, is this what the city then will be paying? And it sounds like there's obviously some other streams of funding that will be covering that. But is that just our portion, or is that the total amount that then will be cost shared between us and the township?
So that total project amount of 7.1 million is the total project cost of this phase of the project. Anything that's not covered by the DWRF would be covered through the cost sharing agreement, and that would either be covered directly by Cascade or captured through the water system rates.
Got it. Okay. Looks like we got, yeah, feel free to.
Any portion that is not covered by the principal forgiveness in the loan would be picked up through Cascade Township rates. This is one that is being funded through Grand Rapids.
Got it. Thanks. All right. Hearing no other questions, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. Item number 15 is a resolution awarding a contract with Diversco Construction Company Incorporated for the reconstruction of Hall Street in the amount of $3,189,107.50, with a total amount not to exceed $4,237,159.
So move.
Support.
Moved and supported.
Under this project, Hall will be reconstructed between Madison and Eastern, a distance of about a half mile, with some additional work being performed on Paris and Adams segments south of Hall Street. Project will include replacement of a 132-year-old water main, abandonment of a 24-inch transmission main that's no longer necessary since a consolidation occurred in pressure districts, and then the replacement of existing water services, 11 of which are lead, as well as sidewalk replacement and other ADA ramp improvements. Construction will occur this construction season. 4 bids were received, with Diversco, again, providing that low bid amount of $3,189,107.50, which is under the engineer's estimate of about $3.3 million. So again, seeking your approval of the contract. The total not to exceed of $4,237,159 will come from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. This is one of 5 projects that we're seeking to construct through that, which has up to half of the amount eligible for principal forgiveness. And then also additional funding will come from the Water System Fund, Vital Streets Fund, and Sewer System Fund.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. Item number 16 is a resolution awarding a contract with Montgomery Excavating LLC for the reconstruction of Eleanor Street and Fremont Avenue in the amount of $3,271,994.55, with a total amount not to exceed $4,264,335.
So move.
Support.
All right, moved and supported.
So Eleanor Street between Plainfield and Diamond, as well as Fremont between 3rd and 4th Streets will be reconstructed under this contract. It's another DWRF, one of those 5 projects being funded through the state revolving fund. And so it includes replacement of water mains, water services, 28 of which are lead, replacement and downsizing of a 141-year-old sanitary sewer, and sidewalk replacement. Work will also occur this construction season. Montgomery was the low of 5 bids that were received, with that amount of $3,271,994 under the engineer's estimate of $3.48 million. So seeking your approval of the contract, the total expenditures of $4,264,335 will come through that DWRF funding program, as well as supplemental funding from the water system, vital streets, and sewer system funds.
Great, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. Item number 17 is a resolution approving an agreement and a lease accepting deeds and authorizing payments for reconstruction of Godfrey Avenue from the Grand River to Oxford Street and in Chestnut Street from 600 feet west of Godfrey Avenue to Godfrey Avenue in an amount not to exceed $3,300,000, 489 and 501 Market Avenue Southwest.
Support.
Moved and supported.
So we've been working for some time to acquire property interests at 489 Market. That's a surface parking lot that's located at the northwest corner of Godfrey and Market, adjacent to the river and flood wall system there. That is so that we can utilize that area to serve as the outfall for the Godfrey Sewer Project, the sewer separation to occur between Oxford and the Grand River along Godfrey there. Under that new project, the new sanitary sewer will be routed into the east trunk sewer, which runs adjacent to the flood wall under that 489 property. And then the separated storm sewer will outlet through the flood wall into the Grand River. Now, the owners of 489 also own the adjacent property southwest of there at 501 Market. That's the warehouse garage building, the owners being GLOC. City staff and consulting engineers have been working with GLOC with regard to a flooding issue that has been apparent on at least 4 occasions when the Grand River rises to a certain point. Seepage is seen occurring through the floor of that building. The owner was not agreeable to working with 489 without also looking to resolve the issue on 501. So we've handled these 2 properties together in our negotiations. We've done extensive investigation and thus far have been unable to determine the cause and the pathway of the flooding issue, other than knowing that when river levels crest, we're seeing it come up through there. So we now need to demolish a portion of that building to be able to better evaluate subsurface conditions and what's going on beneath the surface. The owners agreed to convey ownership of both properties for an appraised value of $2,606,400. Other terms and conditions within the agreement that's before you include payment in lieu of relocation costs of $100,000, appraisal and attorney costs of $50,000, a 2.5-year lease back of the portion of the 501 property that's not needed for construction or this subsurface investigation. So we'll remove the portion of the building necessary to do that, but leave the remainder. And until that 2.5-year period is complete. And then ultimately seeking your approval of this resolution, which approves all those terms and conditions, accepts the deeds for the properties, and then authorizes the payment amounts not to exceed $3.3 million. Funding will come from a combination of primarily the Kent County Drain Commissioner flood wall bonds, some sewer system fund work associated with the sewer project, but also we're applying to see if we can utilize grants that the Community Development Department has obtained for blight elimination. It's called a blight elimination program, and if this is eligible for that, which we've submitted documentation for, we will utilize that funding source as well.
Great, thanks. I remember touring this property, I think, what was it, a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago with you and the team. And yeah, it's certainly a scary issue, I'm sure, when they're trying to do business and their building starts flooding. So excited to see some resolution moving forward with this. Colleagues, any questions on this one? Yeah.
Mr. Bergman, what's the lease back amount that the city will be receiving from the 2.5 years?
It was a lease back at no cost.
At no cost,
so that's
okay.
what they had requested, and that's what we, in our negotiations, have brought before you.
Good question, Commissioner. Hearing no other questions, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. Lastly, we have item number 18, which is a resolution awarding a contract with Nagel Construction Incorporated for rotomilling and resurfacing at various locations, 2023-2, in the amount of $3,971,648.95, with a total amount not to exceed $5,223,360.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Bergman?
So this is contract 2 of our rotomilling and resurfacing work, and it contains 20 different street segments totaling approximately 5 miles. Contract 2023-1 began last season and also included 20 street segments, that one totaling about 4 miles. So together, looking to improve about 9 miles across the city under these 2 contracts. The contract is for a period of 2 years, and it reserves the right at the city's option to add additional locations or extend the contract, again, at the city's option. 3 bids were received on March 14th. Nagel provided the low bid of $3.97 million, just over our engineer's estimate of about $3.95 million. Nagel, in this case, will be utilizing a 21% micro-local business enterprise, or MLBE, participation rate, utilizing Durand contractors to perform the associated concrete work with this project. So financing will come from the Vital Streets Fund.
Great, thanks. Colleagues, any questions or comments? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, it is approximately 9:51. That concludes our business for today. We will be back in here at 10 o'clock for Committee on the Whole, and in the meantime, we'll adjourn this meeting. Thanks.
right, good morning, everyone. We will call the Committee of the Whole to order here at 10 a.m. And I want to welcome Commissioner Goy to his first Committee of the Whole, and excited to have you here, sir.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
We'll kick things off this morning with a resolution designating social districts where alcoholic beverages sold by multiple qualified Michigan Liquor Control Commission licensees may be consumed and purchased pursuant to Public Act 124 of 2020 as amended.
So moved. Support.
It's been moved and supported, and we'll turn it over to our city clerk.
Yeah, so we have several of these districts, and this new district will be affectionately known as Alger Heights. So it'll be around the area of Brass Rings, SIP, and the Old Goat. And so this will allow them to move around in the social zone with that. And so they've been all the social districts have been very successful. And obviously that another district wants to get in on the game shows that success is still going well.
Very good. Thank you for that. Colleagues, any questions for the clerk regarding this resolution? All right. Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. That'll take us to our second agenda item, which is a resolution authorizing the publication of and setting the date to consider ordinance amendments to Section 1.905 and Section 1.912 of Chapter 21, Downtown Development Authority of Title I Administration of the Grand Rapids City Code to allow for the expansion of the Grand Rapids Downtown Development Authority Area Number 1 and an amended development and tax increment financing plan for Downtown Development Area Number 1.
So moved. Support.
Moved and supported after that short novel. We'll turn it over to Mr. Kelly from DGRI.
Well said, and good morning.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So as Commissioner O'Connor outlined, this item is related to the ongoing DDA plan amendments and requesting approval of the resolution authorizing the long paragraph novel that you just gave. So this piece of the process is necessary because we're doing a boundary amendment to the DDA and proposing to add in 3 new parcels. A draft of the revised ordinance and the new legal description were included in your packet. With your approval of this resolution, the clerk would be authorized to publish a summary in the paper of record, and then in 60 days, the ordinance could be considered for your approval. Lastly, while this component of the process does not require a public hearing, we do have a public hearing scheduled this afternoon, and so it would be welcome and hope that we'll be receiving comments on the overall recommendations. With that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Very good. Questions or comments from Mr. Kelly? Anyone? All right. Hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Before we go to our briefing, we do have a closed session scheduled for after this meeting. So if I could get a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. This is a roll call vote, right, Joel? Start with Commissioner Perdue.
Yes.
Mr. Robbins?
Yes.
Mr. Sassi?
Yes.
Commissioner Goy?
Yes.
Commissioner Knight?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Motion carries. Thank you. That'll move us to our third item on Committee of the Whole, which is a briefing on the proposed zoning ordinance housing policy text amendments. And I'll turn to our city manager.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Commissioners. Good to see everyone this morning. Today, we would like to follow up on the hearing that we had in our last meeting and as committed, address some of the questions and concerns that residents expressed, but also we received additional questions both on the dais as well as off dais from commissioners. So today we'd like to do that, and I want to start by saying that we have been working on this very feverishly since the public hearing, and many employees have also worked during the spring break, and so I want to thank them for that. We were working up until almost the moment of this meeting, so a lot of work has gone into it. And as you consider the proposed zoning changes today, just be mindful that this is one of the tools that we need to address our housing supply and housing affordability issues, and there are many additional tools besides zoning that we are already looking at, and from working with developers to incentivize more development, more affordability, looking at the tools that we have to offset the costs of housing development, as well as helping some small developers who could help us with infill housing having access to capital. And so zoning is one of the many things that we need to consider, but today we're fortunate to consider the things that within our control. So I'm going to ask our planning director, Director Turkelson, to come and provide a overview for you and the public, but I also want to distribute in more detail a response to the questions, more formally rather, that we received, and then you can have that for additional follow-up as needed, and we may refer to them from time to time during our briefing this morning. So with that, I'd like to ask Director Turkelson to come, and again, this took the collaboration of a lot of departments and community partners as well to get us ready for this conversation today. While you will not be making decisions today, and we're teed up to come back at a later meeting, we will need to be clear about direction from the majority of the commission, and so I'm really going to, as I hear things and it is one or two people commenting on it, we're going to really be listening to whether or not this is a majority of the commission, because a lot of work on any changes would have to occur both with legal and other staff, and so we want to be real clear on what the preference of the majority of the commission is as we continue this dialogue. So with that, I will turn it over to Director Turkelson.
Thank you, City Manager. Good morning, Commission. I will be conducting most of the presentation this morning, but there will be some cameos from our interim Mobile GR Director, Jennifer Casper, as well as Housing Next, Ryan Kilpatrick. And as the City Manager mentioned, the structure of the presentation that I have today is to go through those 5 categories that should look familiar to you. I will very briefly touch on the recommendations by the Planning Commission, because I think previous to the 2 previous presentations has provided a pretty thorough summary about those recommendations, and then focus on the stated concerns that we heard from the public hearing. I will be referencing the FAQ that was distributed as much as reasonably possible throughout this presentation, and then talk about what some options are. So if it's okay, I'd like to go through all of that, and then the last slide will prompt us back to going through each of the categories to get your feedback and to hear your discussion. So accessory dwelling units is the first category. Planning Commission has recommended several changes to the zoning ordinance. Most of the recommendations center on what is the review process, and specifically streamlining that review process, as well as removing the owner occupancy requirement and the parking requirement. We heard several concerns from community input, both at the Planning Commission as well as at the City Commission public hearing. Most of the concerns seem to center on the elimination of the owner occupancy requirement, as well as the review process being streamlined where it no longer allows a public hearing or public input on each individual application, because it would be considered by right or a permitted use. There are quite a bit of conversation around whether or not owner occupancy and whether that's a helpful tool to preserve ownership opportunities within the city. And so question 1 on the FAQ document that was given to you really takes a deep dive into why the elimination of the owner occupancy requirement is helpful in terms of supporting this type of housing within the city. So largely the answer focuses on the flexibility as a property owner to do what you wish to do in terms of if you live there and you build an accessory dwelling unit, it limits your choice to be able to move away or to who you sell to, because if an owner occupancy is in place, it really limits the future reuse of that property. In addition, there's financial implications in terms of how accessory dwelling units can be financed through banks. It really limits the ability for lending to support the construction of accessory dwelling units. And then lastly, it really limits who can own property with an accessory dwelling unit. So specifically, if there is a nonprofit, of which we've had nonprofits, housing housing nonprofits within the city request the use or the construction of accessory dwelling units, they would not be able to do that as part of their affordable housing project. So some options for you today are to move forward with the Planning Commission recommendation as it's presented. You could look at amending that recommendation or narrowing the scope of that, which may include keeping the owner occupancy requirement or keeping that current review process that we call the qualified review, where it provides an option for a public hearing at neighbor request. Or lastly, you could also look at this and decide to expand upon the Planning Commission recommendation. So there are some considerations, of course, some of which I've just touched on and also are reiterated through the FAQ, that it would limit option 2 specifically by narrowing that recommendation of the Planning Commission, would limit the flexibility of an owner and how they wish to use their property, financing implications, and then also with the public hearing process, it's a less predictable review process with quite a bit of time and work that goes into preparation for that hearing, which could result in a subsequent denial based on the Planning Commission's review standards.
City Manager, do you want to talk about these one at a time, or do you want to go through the whole presentation and discuss them all at the end? Or
I think it may be better to go through them collectively and come back. Is that okay with the Commission?
Yeah.
I know it's a lot of information. We're happy. This is the only briefing, so we're happy to do it either way.
Put it out there to my colleagues and you. Yeah, go through the whole. Okay. We'll go through the whole presentation.
Okay. The final slide hopefully brings you back to each of these, and of course we can cycle through. The second category looked at our unrelated occupant requirements. So as you know, currently we have no more than 4 unrelated occupants may reside in a single dwelling. Planning Commission considered that and is proposing a recommendation to increase the unrelated occupants from 4 to 6. We did hear some concerns about at the public hearing about potential for increased nuisance complaints, concerns about the lack of enforcement capacity, specifically within our code compliance department. And then also, and I think this is maybe a theme of concerns that runs throughout, is that many of these amendments do not focus on ownership opportunities, but rather really support more of a rental market approach. So there are considerations with keeping the 4 unrelated occupants. So with 6 unrelated occupants, there is greater potential for increasing of cost-sharing benefits to the tenants to be able to share in the cost of utilities, for example. And then it really would be a low-cost and very efficient way to open up rooms or housing opportunities within the city that would not require any changes, physical changes to a building. Now, of course, all that said, there are housing and applicable building code requirements that regulate the life safety for how many people can safely occupy a structure. So your options would be to adopt the Planning Commission recommendation to increase unrelated occupants. Of course, you could consider amending or narrowing that recommendation, which I think in this particular case would mean keeping the current definition of no more than 4 unrelated. Or, of course, you could consider the Planning Commission recommendation and expand upon that. Perhaps it would go to 7 or 8 individuals. Again, still those life safety housing requirements that are in place. The next 2 items are under our group living category. I've mentioned before that our group living category is a relatively broad definition that includes several specific uses. So for the purposes of this conversation, we're focusing on single room occupancies, or SROs, and transitional shelters. So the Planning Commission has sent a recommendation that effectively would allow for greater flexibility for SROs to exist within the city, and also for those SROs to be permitted within residential zone districts. In some cases, as you'll note in the table on this screen, it would require special land use, meaning review by the Planning Commission, and where that exists, where that process would exist, we would suggest or recommend a good neighbor plan that should look familiar to you based on some of the cannabis uses. That really is a document that does encourage you to be a good neighbor if you are operating, in this case, an SRO. We didn't hear any specific, or I didn't hear any specific concerns around SROs and the proposed recommendations. I think that there was more general concerns, again, that the amendments focus on rental opportunities versus ownership opportunities. So that because of that lack of specificity, you'll see that there isn't as much here when we talk about the possibility or the option of amending or narrowing that recommendation by the Planning Commission. So your option could be to support what the Planning Commission has recommended to you, narrowing that recommendation, which in this case, I maybe thought the scaling the recommendation back a little bit. Perhaps we don't allow the very small scale of 6 or fewer units within the residential zone districts, so that any SRO, if it were proposed, is still a special land use. So that could be something to consider. Alternatively, you could look at the Planning Commission's recommendation and expand upon that, meaning be more permissive in terms of what is permitted and where it would be permitted. Consideration of option 2 of narrowing that recommendation would be, of course, further limiting the housing typologies that are permitted within our residential zone districts. Second group living category is transitional or emergency shelters. This slide is what you've seen before. Planning Commission looked at really expanding upon the opportunities or the permissions to allow for shelters to exist within the city and not just concentrated in certain commercial corridors by allowing smaller scale to be considered within residential zone districts. In all cases, the Planning Commission would consider a shelter as a special land use, meaning it would need a review and approval by the Planning Commission before one could be operated. There's additional use regulations such as what types of streets could a emergency shelter be located on, and then an acreage requirement. And so I think the details, the nuances of that recommendation are really important to understand. There were concerns at the public hearing. I think there was probably the greater concern about the permissiveness of small-scale shelters to exist within the residential zone districts. I think that there was some thought that perhaps that we could benefit from either a separation distance requirement, which would effectively limit the number that could exist by having a buffer, if you will, around that. And again, just continuing to focus the concern about the focus on ownership versus ownership of rental versus ownership. Pardon me. So your options could be to adopt the Planning Commission recommendation as it is. You could narrow that recommendation, and here's some examples that I think speak to the concerns that we've heard, which would be not allowing shelters with 6 or less individuals or adults, pardon me, in residential zone districts, not allowing shelters on 7 to 12 within neighborhood or link residential street types, and applying a separation distance between what the mid-size emergency shelters. So those are some options for you to consider that I believe might address some of the concerns that we heard. But of course, again, one of the general considerations would be to limiting the housing types within the city. So lastly, your option could be to amend the Planning Commission's recommendation and expand or become more permissive in where and how shelters can exist within the city. So the third category, note fourth, is around the small scale infill development of housing. And for this particular conversation, we're really only focused on our traditional neighborhood, low density residential zone districts. Any other zone district at this point is a conversation that that is taking place as part of the Community Master Plan rewrite. So these recommendations focus on our TN LDR zone district, and we are only talking about 6 or fewer units that would be permitted by right when located on link residential and network residential streets that are defined by our Vital Streets Plan. There is still the minimum density requirements of 2,000 square feet of lot area for every dwelling unit. So math is not my strong suit, but if you look at a 6-unit development, it would require 12,000 square feet of lot area. So when you think about our traditional neighborhoods, know that just because the ordinance makes it possible doesn't make it feasible in all circumstances. And that will be a theme that Ryan and I will continue to touch on as we hone in on this particular recommendation. We know that through our analysis of our zoning that our minimum lot width and area requirements currently are supporting these larger scale developments because of of how we've required a significant amount of minimum lot area or minimum width requirements. And so this proposed recommendation would eliminate those established lot area and width requirements. So existing lots would allow for a multifamily in those parameters in the location and street type, subject to, of course, the density being met and green space, et cetera. So this was a station, if you will, that we had at Commission Night Out. We've affectionately called it the zoning math. And I think it's really important for us to understand, again, that the zoning may make it feasible, but there's other tools and resources that will make it more practical. So not every home in the city or in the traditional neighborhood is going to be able to sustain a conversion because of the cost of it, the cost of construction, the median rental prices, and in some cases, that zoning math simply will not make economic or financial sense for a home to be converted. And so we had several questions around this within the FAQ about the likelihood of that conversion. I briefly touched on that just now. We heard a lot about what have we learned from other communities, how does increased supply affect affordability, and then also concerns about displacement, some equitable outcomes, and centering these recommendations on what outcomes we can expect. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Kilpatrick to spend a few minutes touching or further explaining that zoning math, and then also addressing the concerns that we've heard both from the dais, or questions from the dais, and concerns from the community.
Thanks, Kristen. So I think with the missing middle housing typologies, there are a few things that are important to understand. The 3 to 6 unit buildings will be most financially viable on existing vacant lots because of the costs to acquire a single family home in the city of Grand Rapids. So if you look on Zillow today, the average price that I can find in the city of Grand Rapids is $286,000 for a single family home. The lowest home I was able to find was $212,000 today. Now, on any given day, you might find something lower. You might see the average goes up a little bit. But if your acquisition cost to buy a piece of property is around $200,000 to $250,000, there isn't a developer that's going to say, even a lot of nonprofits can't say, we're just going to eat that cost and we're not going to pass it on to the tenant. So when you've got that high acquisition cost, and then either the developer or the nonprofit is faced with the prospect of tearing down the single family house and then replacing it with a new 3 or 6 unit building, or attempting to convert that building, the construction cost is also a factor that has to be accounted for and passed on ultimately to the renters. So I don't know if you received it. We did some math here where we really looked at what is the construction cost to build a new building of this size, what would it have to be financed at, and then what would the rental rates have to be. And so while it's possible to build a building after you've acquired a single family home and removed it or converted it, it would likely mean that rental rates have to be significantly higher than existing rental rates in the neighborhood. And for as long as there are available units that exist today in the neighborhood, it's unlikely that a future resident will elect to pay $1,000 more a month for a new building than they're willing to pay for an old building. Now, what's important to understand is what we're also facing in the market today is scarcity. Scarcity is really what's driving prices up. Because we have more individuals and households who want to live in the city than we have available housing units, their competition is driving prices up. And so our inability to produce more housing at a price point that people can afford is driving rent rates up, and it's driving sale prices up. So there may be a date in the future, if we're unable to provide enough supply now, there may be a date in the future at which point people are willing to spend $2,500 a month for a 2-bedroom, where today they're only spending $1,500 a month for a 2-bedroom. So what I can't do is guarantee that that's never going to happen, right? There may be a point in the future where we have allowed scarcity to become such a predominant factor in the marketplace that similar to other markets like Austin or Nashville or Raleigh, Durham, people are paying dramatically more rent than they're paying now. So the solution here is, one, we need to recognize that at this particular moment in time, the math doesn't work on a majority of parcels, but allowing it to work on those vacant parcels that are of adequate size does allow for more housing to get built by both nonprofit and for-profit development partners. But we need to pair this with the strategy that you've already adopted, which is allowing 4-story buildings by right in commercial districts, eliminating ground floor retail requirements so that more residential uses can be built on the ground floor, reducing and eliminating parking requirements. As you see in the graph, the city of Minneapolis adopted many of these exact same changes in 2018. And what they saw was about 65 to 70% of the new housing construction that resulted was in those larger scale multifamily buildings that we're seeing get built in Grand Rapids as well. So what I would not expect is that you would see a dramatic number of new units created in 3 and 4 and 5 unit buildings. You're still going to see a majority of units built in larger multifamily buildings because that's the financial product that banks know how to finance and that developers know how to use. But what you may see, and what we really want to start to encourage going forward with the Economic Development Department and with some of our nonprofit partners, is new emerging developers coming to the marketplace who are now able to build a building that is profitable to them, that allows them to generate some wealth in the community, and allows them to participate in the growth and the wealth creation of the city. Now, this isn't going to be a significant number of new units that are created. We're probably not going to have hundreds of new developers who emerge as a result of this. But our goal, I think, over the next year is to get at least 20 new emerging developers into that marketplace, building 2 and 3 and 4 unit buildings. And these are the kinds of zoning provisions that actually allow for that to occur. And hopefully those new emerging developers from our neighborhoods are able to then grow and move on into commercial corridors, and a next round of emerging developers can come in behind them. So that's really where we get at who benefits from this. And I think one of the themes that we heard in the public comment and that we've heard in the written submissions is a fear that the zoning changes will result in outside investors making profit on the backs of local residents. And I think what's unfortunate is that's happening today in single-family homes. We have a lot of single-family homes today that are being rented, that are owned by for-profit organizations that aren't headquartered in Michigan, right? They're headquartered other places. It's only profitable for outside organizations to buy single-family homes and rent them when there is a scarcity of available housing. Right? If we had an adequate supply of housing for the folks who wanted to live here, there wouldn't be big opportunities for profit for those outside investors. The same thing will be true when we allow for duplexes and 3plexes and 4 units and 5 units and all the rest. For as long as there's a scarcity, people will find ways to profit off of that scarcity. But if we're collectively able to produce enough available supply to satisfy demand, it gets harder and harder for investors to make profits off the back of renters at the local level. And so what I want to stress is, yes, there will be investors who say, yep, we can do this and we can make money off of it. But the goal here is to make sure that local residents have new opportunities to create wealth and to begin to reduce the amount of profits that outside investors are able to make on our single-family home stock, because that really has been the target over the last 5 or 6 years. There are lots of available articles online right now about the growth of single-family for rent product as a financial product that private equity firms are buying en masse because there is such a scarcity of supply that's available today. I probably went way over time. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
Well, while you're on that topic, though, can you go back one slide, Joel? The discussion around out-of-state investors and people buying things for profit, I think is counterintuitive, though, to some of the data that's been provided by our assessor. If you look at the last 10 years of principal residence exemption on single-family homes in Grand Rapids, it's went up about 5%, even though prices are going up. So to me, that narrative is it's a bit of a disconnect. If owner occupancy of single-family residence has actually increased 5% over the last year, along with pricing, that means to me that people wanting to live in Grand Rapids are outbidding the for-profit folks.
Yes. Well, and if you remember, a few months ago, we presented some data in the 49507 zip code that showed that was actually the zip code that had the greatest conversion of two-family or greater back to single-family. And we also saw the greatest jump from low and moderate income households to higher income households in that zip code. And it's frankly because we don't have enough housing available. Those higher income households are able to outcompete our low and moderate income households.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, thank you, Ryan. So back to the recommendations. So Ryan was able to touch on quite a few of the benefits of additional density and address some of the concerns that we did hear at the public hearing, which again centered on loss of ownership opportunities, concerns about out-of-state investors purchasing, as well as the gentrification and displacement concerns. So I do think, again, in your FAQ, we delve into this quite a bit more, but there are other strategies that the city has in place, both through community development and economic development, that help mitigate for the concerns about gentrification and displacement. And again, Ryan's 49507 is part of that conversation. So there are options before the City Commission to adopt the Planning Commission recommendation as it is before you. This one might be a little bit trickier. So certainly there is the option to narrow the recommendation of the Planning Commission or expand that recommendation, meaning be more permissive. If that is the majority of the commission wishes for maybe additional changes, this might be the appropriate one to consider remanding back to the Planning Commission for further consideration and provide some additional policy direction to them for what your expectations might be. So the last category of zoning recommendations is around the parking requirements for the city. And so this specific recommendation from the Planning Commission is targeted at that small scale development. So first of all, the recommendation included the elimination of parking for accessory dwelling units. You saw that on the first slide, I believe. And then the other part of their recommendation is only applicable in our TN, traditional neighborhoods, low-density residential zone districts, and it's eliminating the parking requirements for developments of 6 or fewer units when located on link residential and network residential streets. And the idea of that is to really prioritize the space that we do have within the city, the land area, for housing for people and not parking of vehicles. Clearly, there are some considerations and concerns. We heard about the lack of existing on-street parking. There was concerns about the transit service and maybe the inadequacies of the timing for people to reasonably use transit service. Some of it is cart before the horse, right? Like we need people to be using that transit service to make those investments for those routes to be more frequent in order for the Rapid to make those changes. So the Rapid has been supportive of these recommendations, understanding that the more we drive or offer mobility options, the better those mobility options are going to be because people will be using them. So the options before you today would be to adopt the recommendation of the Planning Commission. You could consider amending that recommendation or narrowing that recommendation, which again might include the remanding back to the Planning Commission with some additional policy guidance, such as simply rather than eliminating parking requirements, we could reduce parking requirements, increasing staff's ability to grant parking waivers, understanding that those are tied to the availability of either on-street parking or mobility options that are available. We could add additional waivers or expand that. And of course, you could amend or expand the recommendation upon from what was sent to the Planning Commission. I would just go back and caution you that keeping the parking requirements as is for small-scale residential development will make it extremely difficult for us to build small-scale development. The idea is that where we have existing lots or existing buildings to convert to density, that same lot simply cannot accommodate the parking requirements that are in place today. So I don't want to say and be dramatic that it would render that recommendation moot, but it would be pretty close. So that's why those recommendations are very much tied together. And then the chart here just reminds you what those parking requirements are today, just for your knowledge, since you don't live in the zoning world the way the Planning Commission and I do. I'm going to invite Jennifer Casper up to talk to this next slide. We know that the city has been hard at work about looking at mobility options and other tools, and I think specifically parking occupancy on street or residential parking permit programs are but one tool that the city has that can address some of the concerns that were stated during the public hearings.
Good morning. So on the slide here is a map that we recently presented to our Mobile GR Commission in our March meeting. So this was our most recent on-street residential count from our biannual counts that we do. So this was just from this past fall. Just as a reminder, we've been doing these biannual counts of the residential neighborhoods since 2017 when we modified our residential permit parking program. So the counts that were done was to take into account different times of day. So they were counted in the mornings from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. as well as in the evening from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. We did do a data inventory audit from when we've previously done counts. Before we were counting the entire street. Not taking into consideration areas that might currently be signed as no parking or fire hydrants that aren't actually usable parking. So that did kind of adjust our inventory a little bit. However, we do still have total about 8,300 residential parking spaces. Of that, you can see here about 28% currently are occupied on average. And so in order to qualify for the residential parking permit criteria, that there must be 3 contiguous block faces at 75% or more occupancy. We certainly wouldn't be exploring doing a residential permit parking area only on one street. It would have to show that there was a neighborhood with that 3 contiguous street pattern over several streets in order for us to take that into consideration. But this is just one of the tools that already exist in the toolbox that we can use to help preserve and regulate on-street residential parking.
Thank you, Jennifer. So that is another example of the tools that the city has in place to be able to address some of the concerns or impacts of potential zoning changes and increased density. So with that, that concludes my formal presentation. Again, this slide here is intended to prompt some discussion, remind you about the options that are available to you. If we could go through maybe each category, have a discussion, get your preference. So what is before you today, the proposed ordinance is scheduled for consideration on April 23rd. So that is the path that I am on, unless I am otherwise directed by the City Commission to make some additional changes. And so we'd be looking for the majority of commissioners to be able to agree upon which option they would like to proceed with.
Mr. Chair, let me just, and to further clarify, so the staff is now prepared to bring back the ordinance without amendments in support of the Planning Commission's recommendations, which they unanimously approve. So that is our position today.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I guess we'll start at the top, and we can just go one by one and kind of just make sure we see where everyone's at, see where there's questions or comments. So we'll start with ADUs. Commissioner Yasasi?
I'm going to go like easiest to more.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I will ask my question, which is on, can you go back to that slide, Joel, the ADU slide? Oh, just passing it off to Ms. Turkelson.
Control.
Can you, yes. Okay, so, yes, I think we heard a number of things. Thanks, Ryan, for the presentation. I think this is This has been a really interesting process. Again, I think a lot of the things that we know is that somebody could have been talking about these proposed changes or changes like them for years, and somebody may be hearing about it for the first time. Those things have to exist together. So I think that's what we've tried to approach. And I would say this presentation, this might be better than the last presentation that I said was the best presentation I've seen at Commission. So I think you've pulled in together a lot of research, listening to what people are saying. I would also say, just as you've noted some of the concerns at Commission, we've also received a certain number of messages from folks that are saying, I'm in support of all of these, or what could you do more to be even, to go even beyond what Planning Commission has presented to us. So I want to be, I guess as open and transparent that has been a variety of conversations. Commissioner Knight and I just had a conversation last week with some folks in our ward. So right now, I think what has been on a yearly basis, how many ADUs are we reviewing? Can you remind us of that number again? Because it's a small number.
Yeah, so I believe since I've been with the city since 2013, we've had, I think, 9 accessory dwelling unit applications.
Okay. And then, so I think the question for me is, I think the piece about the financing is a really important piece to understanding how, again, what we might be able to do, but what are the realities and why we may be considering something. Say if we were to remove the owner-occupied, accept the language, some of the language as presented, but go to keep that qualified review piece. In your all professionals' opinion, would that stifle what we want to intend to do, particularly, obviously, as we've heard from people, how are you creating more housing, but we need to do all these other things to make it happen. So do you have a thought on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general rule of thumb in planning and zoning, it is a best process to identify what is the vision, what do we want to see, and then establishing the review process to be able to support that. So if you have that qualified review process or a planning commission consideration, that is viewed as a pretty significant barrier because there are thousands of dollars of time and application fees and document prep that have to be done in order to be ready for a public review process. And in order to, and that investment is made without knowing whether or not the accessory dwelling unit in this case would be approved. So it could be denied. And so when we talk about redevelopment ready community, a lot of the research and best practice is to identify and define what we want to see, and then streamlining the review processes to make it easier possible to be able to achieve those outcomes. And the moment you set up a process, unfortunately in this case it's Planning Commission, the moment you set up a process without a predictable outcome, that is viewed as a significant barrier. It's also challenging. We're talking about homeowners that are not generally accustomed going through these types of processes, and it's very stressful. It's very challenging for them to be able to put a packet together that addresses those statutory requirements.
Would there, thank you for that. And then, because I think that's that weighing of what do we have right now. In the end, it's still going to probably be a very expensive option for individuals. So it's not, I think if you've said this before, it's not going to be like we're going to be flooded with any one of these things because it's time and money and energy. What about like a notification process, or, not something that's required, but as individuals are coming to, the city about what their plans are, I feel like some of this is, some of the concerns might be communication and people just feeling like, I don't know what's going on next door to me. And I don't know if that's even something that we could be regulating, but I'm just wondering how other cities might approach, maybe not in the same sense of a qualified review, but how do you communicate or how do you share something that, as a neighbor, I might be aware of, hey, this is a consideration.
So 2 thoughts. I'm not aware of many communities that have a notice of filing, just a, hey, by the way, we've received an application from your neighbor, just wanted to make you aware. Because in most cases, it sets up a dynamic of, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't like this, what do I do? They're going to come to me and I'm going to say, well, I understand, but it is a permitted use and they do meet all the requirements. So thank you for your comments. I guess you can go talk, like it just sets up, you want to manage expectations about what we do with that information. Second, we do have a process in place, we call it Building Eye, where a resident can sign up with no cost to receive notice of any time an application is filed with our department. I always caution, set your filters appropriately so you don't hear about every HVAC system and air conditioning condensing unit that goes in, but you can structure that to be by neighborhood, to be by application type. So that is already in place, and we really do try to push that out so that there is that communication of those applications.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Other colleagues with questions around ADUs? Commissioner Goy?
Thank you, Director, for your report. I resemble that remark that Commissioner Usasi talked about from the spectrum from this end to someone coming in brand new and not knowing all the in-between discussions around that. So I want to go back to the housing policy discussion that this body had on July 13, 2023. The goal for this conversation is to meet a projected need of 14,000 new units by 2027. And in that packet, there was a page that talks about scenario building example. I don't know if you remember that. And it's talked about there are 24,993 residentially zoned parcels in the city. And then if two-family dwellings are permitted by right on linked residential and neighborhood residential street types in all residential zone districts, potential unit increase of 18,235 could be experienced. And then the second one is if two-family dwellings are permitted by right on linked residential and neighborhood residential street types in TN residential zone districts, potential unit increase of 13,950. Can you help me understand? Will the new amendments get us there, or is this something that doesn't require any any amendments, and we can accomplish this with existing ordinances?
Yep, so that was a scenario building tool that the Planning Commission utilized to understand what is the impact of this change. And so it was a pretty sophisticated system that the Planning Commission was able to look at. If we just talk about these streets, what is the potential unit increase? So that particular slide showed that if we made this change where we allowed duplexes or two-family dwellings by right, so permitted uses, to exist on the link residential, network residential, the resulting potential would be the thousands of units you've referenced. I'm sorry, I didn't come prepared with that slide.
Oh, that's fine.
But that's just the potential. Practically speaking, not every one of those units will convert. Not every one of those structures could reasonably convert to a duplex. So it was really just to try to help the Planning Commission understand, and we introduced it, I think, at that joint meeting, is just to make data-informed decisions. Like, could this really move the needle? And understand, are we talking about a low-impact change or a high-impact change? So it wasn't to suggest that every one of those units will, because that's not reasonable, of course. But if they did, we know that that's a pretty helpful change to make, but we know because practically speaking, not every unit will convert, we do need to make other additional changes, such as allowing accessory dwelling units to be more permissive, have a more permissive regulatory framework.
Okay, can I have a follow-up question? So in your presentation, you made a reference to that adopting this new recommendations from the Planning Commission will help, especially in the development of vacant properties. And I'm wondering if you have the numbers available of vacant properties, and how will those properties translate into a number of units that can be done more efficiently and more cost-effectively with these new amendments.
Yep. So I think Ryan actually stated that. That would be the low-hanging fruit, of course. If there isn't, we know that there are. That existing vacant lots will be the low-hanging fruit because they're vacant. They will not require demolition or a conversion of an existing structure. We do have that data. I did not come prepared with that today, but we do know how many vacant lots could exist, and I believe we could estimate the number of potential units based on existing lot width and area requirements.
Okay. Let me stop there. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Perdue?
Thank you. Good morning still. Thank you for the follow-up for today's conversation. I think an even better use of our time might have been reviewing the FAQs that were prepared and sent to us this morning, because this really is a summary of what the folks on this body asked at our first briefing, and this isn't directed towards you, this is in general. How do we report back to the public what we heard, what we're learning, so that we're all operating from the same information? I think a lot of the comments or questions that we had here, as well as what we heard from the public at our public hearing, are questions that we have the answers to, as evidenced by this 15-page document that we got this morning. And so I think there's a gap right now in helping orient the public to what these changes might mean, why they're important, versus kind of how we're framing the conversation. So I do want to say that. That being said, I am supportive of these changes. I think we've had a lot of really great conversations. I think that these will help move us in the right direction. They are just one tool in our toolbox, as we have referenced before, and I think that they will do good in helping to support more supply and therefore affordability in our city. And this is not all of the approach. Right, and I believe in engaging with folks throughout the city, including in the 3rd Ward, some of which we didn't hear from necessarily at the public hearing, but they have said, hey, we are supportive of these changes, whether they're neighborhood groups or they are nonprofit developers or they are housing advocates, to say, we know that these changes are needed, and we know that this approach is not comprehensive. So the question and recommendation that I have for this body is, when will we get into that part of this conversation? When will we be a little bit more direct and aggressive about naming all those tools in our toolbox to talk about how do we really address affordability in a comprehensive way? I support these. We need this. I'm grateful for all the great work that's been done to prepare us for this. And I think that's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is, well, when are we going to have that larger strategy conversation, really outline what does that look like? The elephant in the room is the answers to the questions that we have, and we need to do a better job of sharing with the public. And for me, particularly thinking about representing our city and all the concerns that we're hearing in the 3rd Ward, how do we ensure that folks who want to stay in the neighborhood can stay in the neighborhood, whether they want to continue to rent, or they want to buy, or they want to develop? They want to continue to keep their kids in the same school, get them through elementary, high school, middle school. How do we increase transparency around evictions in our city? How do we increase transparency around rent hikes in our city? These are the things that folks are asking us for that might not be built into these recommendations, but I think are really, really important for us to address as part of this larger conversation. And then finally, you spoke to it today. I will say kind of that last point around how do we directly address these is allowing that average person in our city to buy, to own, to develop, especially considering the rising costs of construction, the rising costs of living, and that not matching income changes within our city. Unless you're talking about importing folks. And I'm talking about how do we provide those pathways to opportunity and access for folks who are longtime residents of the city, as well as newcomers, right? So I'm supportive of these changes. I think from the beginning, we talked about them as being kind of a meeting in the middle, an incremental approach. I'm not necessarily looking at making any amendments. What I want to push us for is to be more aggressive and more publicly have the conversation more directly about affordability, about retaining people in the neighborhood, so how do we fight displacement, and be really clear about what our role is. Employers have a role, banks have a role, there's a lot of social services might have a role, but in all of those conversations, what is the city's path forward and what is our role? So that's the conversation I would like to have, as well as share these really great responses to questions that we heard from this body and the public in a different way.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think in talking to the city manager, I think these questions will go out to the public after we discuss them today. I think that was the intent, was to provide these for us to have some context for this conversation and then share these out to the public after our dialogue this morning. So, Commissioner Knight first.
Thank you, Commissioner Perdue, for those and everyone else who spoke, because I kind of echo a number of those statements. And it would have been good to even see this beforehand, because it would have saved a whole lot of conversation that we're having right now. The only couple things that I just had a thought about was enforcement was a thing that comes up often. And I know we talk about, and I was reading through here, through this FAQ, about how we have the enforcement for vacant and blighted buildings and Airbnbs and some of those other things, but it's kind of I think what I hear more from people is like a timeliness thing, right? And how we respond back to community. What is that time frame? And I know in here, it shows a timeline of when they, respond back for vacant and blighted buildings, but it almost seems like that contradicts what we're hearing in the street, as opposed to what we're hearing on paper, if that makes sense. And then I wanted to go back to the part when Ms. Jennifer, you were talking about the parking waivers. So does that include options for waivers for seniors and other able people who, if we take away these parking requirements and you have somebody, an older individual that may be living on the street, now they can't get to their house because they got to walk a couple blocks and they're already other abled, right? And how do we make sure that there are accommodations for those people so that they have access to what they need? I know there have been a couple of comments that were made from Second Ward residents for people who had issues even accessing their own homes, and people that were having health care services coming into their house but couldn't find space to actually park to get to the residences that they're serving. So how do we accommodate for that? That's all.
So the waivers, so this particular amendment would state that any new development or any property that has 6 or fewer units would not have to provide private parking. It can provide private parking. So a property can still have a driveway and a couple of parking spaces that are available to support the individual needs of a tenant. So it's not that it can't have it, it's that it's not required. The spaces on street, I guess I would need to defer to Ms. Casper if there are policies in place that allow for accessibility, have individuals that have accessibility limitations. Okay, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Jennifer.
Yes, Commissioner, there is an existing policy that's in effect where you can request to have an accessible space placed outside of your home. That is not exclusively used for the resident that does request it, however, because it is public street and it is an accessible space. There are restrictions around it in that the resident cannot have a driveway in order to qualify for it, and they do have to provide documentation that does justify that they have a disability. So that is separate and distinct from the residential parking permit program. That's just a current program that we offer. And then for caregivers, if they are transporting the resident with the placard, then obviously they could use that space. If we're talking about residential permit parking areas, we do have a section of the policy that does allow for caregiver permits for folks maybe that don't have a car themselves but do have caregivers in the example that you provided, so that they are able to park in that area.
Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. If you don't mind, I'd just like to kind of share my sentiments overall, rather than going through one by one, just because I feel like it's pretty similar overall. First of all, I just want to remind people too, we heard some comments on the process feeling rushed, or it's coinciding with the city master plan, but I appreciated the call out at the commission night out talking about how this conversation has been going on for nearly 10 years, starting in 2015 with the Great Housing Strategies, 2018 with Housing Now, and then even last year with the joint meeting between our city commission, planning commission. in light of that too, I think, we hear a lot of anecdotal stories on both sides of this issue. And when those, conflict, I think many of the times I just resort to looking at what the data speaks to. And so I appreciate the presentation of a lot of research that's been done to see the impacts of these similar changes in other communities. The Planning Commission is our appointed body of experts in this area too. And so I do want to remind people that these are individuals who are well educated in this area and understand the factors that go into it and also the positive consequences that can come as a result. Data-wise, though, I think it was compelling to see that owner occupancy continues to rise and has been rising for over 10 years, with the exception of 2022, which obviously was still kind of on the sunset of the COVID period. But even since then, it's already shown its increase again. I think data is also very clear that cities who have amended their zoning codes in these similar manners have vastly outperformed the nation in terms of being able to control their costs of rent, thus being able to prevent displacement and other outside entities coming in to purchase up properties and use them solely for investment. I do think the inclusivity of development piece is important to mention too. I think anytime we can reduce red tape, it opens the development game up to more individuals who are unfamiliar with the processes, and gives more people paths to taking part in that. And I think really the biggest thing that I want to hammer home is just the point that just because zoning allows for an option doesn't mean that it's feasible in all scenarios. I had a meeting with Kent Habitat this past week, and they're obviously very important partners of ours in the affordable housing space, and was just kind of asking some of their thoughts on these proposed changes, and they were very supportive, and mentioned there's some changes in there that we probably would never do. Like they mentioned parking in particular. Every home that they build, they hope to have on-site parking for those individuals and families. But they said it's nice to still have the option should that be the only barrier to being able to build a new housing unit. So between that and just the point of feasibility of $6,000 in rent per month for a house to being kind of the threshold at which it then becomes profitable for a for-profit entity to then purchase the home, raise it, and turn it into a multiple family dwelling. I think that's fortunately high above where we're currently at with our rental rates, but given the levels of increase we're seeing around the country, it would get there at some point and then would become feasible for those organizations to start doing so. So I think that's important to recognize that in many ways these zoning amendments are protecting our neighborhoods and are not meant to disrupt and displace people. So overall, I am also supportive of these changes that were recommended unanimously by our expert planning commissioners. I think some people have expressed that they'd like us to be less permissive, to which I feel the data is pretty clear that the risks and perceived consequences for these thoughtful changes would be very limited. And I know we've had people say you should be more aggressive. This is a crisis. You need to do as much as you can, as fast as you can. And to that, I do think it's still important to stick with best practices that we've seen proven as effective and successful in other communities. So I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into these. Again, I understand that it invokes strong feelings on either side, but I do appreciate this middle ground that I feel like our expert planning commission has recommended to us, and I would feel very comfortable moving forward with them.
Thank you. Commissioner Perdue?
Thank you. I also want to make the point, too, because we talked about data, and Mr. Kilpatrick kind of named some stats from 49507. But I want to be clear, when we talk about, I think there's been a few references to the increase in owner occupancy in the city, and that potentially being a good thing, because I think it makes the point that investors are not kind of necessarily buying up the neighborhood. But if it means that we're losing Grand Rapidians, that's not necessarily a success in my book, right? And even though the average income level of a neighborhood might rise, that doesn't necessarily mean success if that means that we had to lose all the people who live there and then bring in more higher income individuals. So I want to make that point as we talk about being data driven, and just ask a little bit more directly, city manager, when we might be able to have this broader conversation about how we might, what are all of our tools, how might we more directly get at affordability and anti-displacement, kind of in relation to the larger themes that we've heard as part of this process.
Thank you, Commissioner. And the way that I was reflecting on the question earlier, we've been having the broader conversation since the city commission retreat and workshop in November. in terms of looking at as many levers as we can, in addition to zoning, affordability, supply, access to capital, the work that we have been doing with helping people stay in place, looking at the unhoused community and all the supportive services. And those have been ongoing conversations. It's just not the conversation today. Today, the conversation has been very focused on the proposed text amendments, and can schedule future conversations around some of the broader issues, as we have been doing, around the Affordable Housing Fund and creating, within the Economic Development Project team, creating incentive for small-scale developers. But if we want to workshop specifically, another opportunity to kind of holistically discuss those, again, I think that would be a great opportunity for the City Commission. Happy to do that. And specifically regarding the other comment about the questions, we tried, again, this has been something that the staff has worked all week and weekend pulling together. And so we sent the first draft of this yesterday to this body because it was still ongoing. But if this body wants to spend the rest of the time today publicly discussing, having staff highlight the 18 questions and answers, we're happy to do that. We thought we reflected some of the sentiments within the presentations, but we're happy to take time to do it. This is the only item this morning, so that's the prerogative of this body.
Thank you for that. That's not my ask. I think it sounds like there's a plan to publish this. I don't know if you will do a continuing engagement, and I will use this as a tool with some of the follow-up conversations I have planned for this week with a neighborhood organization. So I don't think we need to spend this time doing that, but really just wanted to make the point of, I think, the larger sentiments and concerns that are valid that people are sharing with us, we do have some answers to some of those. And I think it's important to widely share that. So I thank you all for all the hard work and prep you have done to get us to today.
Thank you. Commissioner Goy?
Director, can I ask a question on the page of the unrelated occupants? You are suggesting in option number 2, keeping the current definition of family to no more than 4. What impact will that have on increasing the need for additional units? Or will it have an impact?
I think that the recommendation is to increase it from 4 to 6.
Yeah, but she's also recommended to no more than 4.
I think that's an option that's what it is currently, and I think staff has suggested that these are other things we could consider. We could also make it 8 or 38 if we wanted to. I think the recommendation is to increase it from 4 to 6 with the ability to go in either direction if this body made that.
Oh, so we're just staying with the 6?
Yes.
Okay, and so option 2 really is not on the table.
I'm sorry. The recommendation from the Planning Commission is to increase it, as Commissioner O'Connor said, but we did hear comments or feedback during the public hearing process. So the idea of option 2 was if the commission wished to make an amendment or be responsive to some of those concerns, an option could be to keep the current definition, which is no more than 4 unrelated occupants. Understanding by doing that, there are, of course, considerations that should be factored in, meaning that this expanding it was viewed by the Planning Commission as a cost-sharing opportunity between the tenants, and that there's a benefit to that, of course, and that it is a really quick, I'm going to say simple way of opening up housing opportunity for individuals that are currently looking, because more bedrooms within that unit or more space within that unit can now accommodate more people.
Okay. Just one comment. City Manager, I am also very concerned, but I didn't think it was going to be done here, of the issue of displacement for certain groups of people that don't have much of a voice or the means necessary to protect their own particular interests. So I'm supportive of these recommendations. I just want to make sure that that demographic is also being considered as we continue this discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner, and perhaps since we have the time, I'm not trying to rush the discussion, could ask Ms. Bohach to come and talk about some of the things that we have done for tenant assistance and eviction prevention in some of the programs that are available community-wide, in addition to some of the responses that we provided.
Good morning.
Sorry. Good morning. Through our Community Development Block Grant and Emergency Solutions Grants programs in terms of the funding recommendations that we presented on March 19th. Over the years, we do provide some resources to organizations in the community to address issues related to homelessness and those who are in housing crisis, which includes eviction. So we have resources that, intend to help prevent those evictions and furthering that sort of slide into homelessness. We have a partnership with the 61st District Court between the city, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services at the 61st District Court, where we have a dedicated staff person, a benefits specialist that works in the courts to help those who are in the court system with eviction, helps them identify state resources and then our local resources, and works with the landlord to hopefully stop that eviction. That's been in place for several years now. There's also other resources through Kent County, some similar resources that are provided to prevent evictions. I don't have the specific details in terms of, numbers and things like that, but there are resources that are available, and we could include that in the FAQ as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make another comment, too, on the issue of displacement. I mean, the First Ward is incredibly diverse and has many neighborhoods that are among our most underserved or under-resourced. And so I think when we talk about displacement and, of course, being sensitive to that issue, I think we have to take a step back and think about what are the reasons why somebody could be displaced. And I think it can probably happen in two main ways, one being someone purchases the rental unit that an individual or family is living in, and they're notified they have to be evicted because it's going to be, raised or developed or something. And then the other method, which I think we hear much more about, is the fact that a landlord raises their rent in order to keep up with increases in costs or, prices, so on and so forth. And so as a result, the family can't afford that and they have to leave. And I think that scenario happens much more often than the scenario that's based on specifically development of or caused by new development units. And the solution to helping ensure that people don't get outpriced of the homes that they're in is by greater density and more supply. And so I think while I understand that's a concern by many people, and of course that's the last thing I want to see happen, I do think that in many ways these amendments will help prevent that from happening moving forward rather than being a cause of it.
Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I'm kind of listening to this conversation, and it's this ability of we can do many things at one time, which I think we talked about at the last meeting. And so I do have some questions for each of the categories, Mr. Chair, because I would say, yes, all the comments that were made about what is it like to live in Grand Rapids, stories that you hear from people, in these conversations, people have come to us about, how do we eliminate junk fees? What are some other things that we can do? And I think we have a track record of doing some of the pieces around reducing the amount of times people can ask for an application if they have a secure if they've already secured a tenant for a location. So those are some things that we've worked on. So I too am very interested and committed. Think we have been pulling from the thread with the Affordable Housing Fund, also looking at what's going to happen as we look at transformational projects that will be coming before us. We'll hear from one today about EDPT. And I also want to ask the questions that I've heard from my constituents specifically about these 5. And to me, that's what's on our agenda today. And so I don't know if others, if we want to go back to going to the next one. I know Commissioner Goey asked a question about the 4 to 6 unrelated. I don't know if I'm the only one who has any questions. I'm happy to ask them all in rapid succession.
Why don't you just go through your list?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right.
Don't go too rapid, please.
You can handle it. You can handle it. I've seen you. So I think the question that I have had around the 4 to 6 certainly relates back to, some of the parking pieces, which that's a question for Ms. Casper that I'll have at the end of mine. But is how do we ensure the quality and healthy housing if we do go to, say, a 4 to 6? Are there any considerations for a certain square footage requirement, obviously we have some things already to, define pieces, but that has been a question and is something that I was interested to see if others have desire around that.
Okay. So there are minimum requirements in the housing code for how much space or square footage of the home can be dedicated per person. I don't know if Connie has that. Okay, we don't have that. But yes, there are minimums that are defined both through the building code and the housing code that preserve life safety. And the city, of course, has a rental registration program that requires every rental unit to be, meaning that unrelated occupants must be registered and inspected. And I believe the inspection requirements tie back to the codes that are adopted by the city that ensure that it's safe and sanitary for the individuals living there. And then the renewal of that registration is dependent on the compliance of that unit. So if you need more information, I'm going to look over my shoulder at Connie to see if she can supplement.
She'll share that with us. Maybe we can put that in the FAQs. How about we do that?
Put it in the FAQ?
In the ones that we're going to share, the questions.
Yes,
So
we can do that.
I think that has been a regular question. Certainly I think I've shared stories about those that are related, that are living, again, in the Housing Next report, we know that people are living double and tripled up because of our current housing situation. Okay. If you can go to the slide for item number 3, the small scale, the SROs and the residential areas. I think some of the biggest concerns that I have heard, at least in the conversations, have been, how do we not get one part of a community to have an abundance of a certain type of housing, which I think, we see that with our housing commission is obviously sort of, I think, leading the way in scattered sites. We've got some great projects in the second ward, like Diamond Place, mixed use, mixed income. And so I think the question there is, how do we, if we were to go to these, how do we ensure that items like that don't happen, where we get sort of a concentration, which has been shown, again, I don't know what study, but some study to cite that would not be in the best interests of both existing residents and the residents who would be looking for that housing. And so, again, it doesn't seem like there is interest, but looking at for me, I was looking at, is item 2, is there interest on the group with option 2 with this item, just given, and again, I think some of the concerns in some of these areas have been communication. I can think of a couple of, that's probably more for the next item on the transitional housing. So that's my question.
Okay, of course, in planning world, any concentration of one use or one particular circumstance is generally never a good thing. And so what you typically would look at is a zoning strategy that allows for a more permissive nature so that you can disperse that particular use. In this case, it could be SROs. So the more restrictive your regulatory framework is, and in this case, meaning narrowing it to certain or limited zone districts or limited street segments, and adding parcel size and such, the more restrictive you make it, the more difficult it is, and you result in a concentration of that particular use. So in the case of emergency shelters, for example, the zoning code is pretty limited as to where we allow emergency shelters, and it is most permissive in our city center zone district. And what we see is the most number of shelters are within our city center zone district, and we have a greater concentration of them. And so by dispersing or making the regulatory framework more permissive so that small-scale shelters, for example, or we could choose SROs, those can now disperse throughout the community and provide a different strategy that reduces the possibility of that concentration from happening. Is there anything else? No? Okay.
Thanks. If you can go to the next one.
I think also with the SROs, the 6 or fewer units, that's not going to be dissimilar to the impact of a rental unit if you were to allow 6 unrelated individuals. So I think that was some of the logic there, is that the impact would be very similar.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I think some of the thoughts around this item for me was, again, interest from colleagues of looking at some of the separation distance pieces. Do we look at the link residential and those pieces versus the neighborhood residential? I'm not hearing that, but that would be some of the feedback that I've gotten and the questions that I wanted to ask today. And I think you have it here on the slide, so.
Yeah.
That's more for my colleagues than for you, Ms. Turkelson.
Decision.
So thank you. So the next one is, I think this one is, I was almost proposing, let's start with this one, because I think this one is sort of the easiest one out of all of them. I mean, again, I don't think any of these are too hard. I think they're just, multi-layered conversations with lots of different opinions. I don't have any additional comments here, Mr. Chair. And then on the parking, and the last item as it relates to parking, if we could go to that slide that had the map that was shown at the mobile GR meeting. So we talked about the 28% of the citywide residential average occupancy. I appreciate the comments about essentially where we went to be even more reflective of what true parking spots that we have and recognizing loading zones. And there's some new loading zones in some areas that I go, so I noticed that. So I appreciate that. And for our person who is watching, that connection point, it said, what is that distance? Because I think that's also what we're talking about. We do have programs, obviously, that I think Commissioner Knight asked around, individuals can request a permit, caregivers, but what is that expectation? I think we talked about sort of that changing norms of it's the spot right in front of my house and this is my spot. But when we talk about citywide residential average occupancy, what is that distance from your home? Am I making sense? Okay.
I think also something to consider, which actually was brought up during public comment at our Mobile GR Commission meeting, is that, if there is a residential permit parking program that's implemented, if there are residents that have driveways, it may be an incentive for folks to actually utilize their driveway, because what we don't take into account here is how many of the homes that we're counting do have driveways, and if they're occupied or not, or if they have garages. So.
Okay, thank you. And then did you also say, Ms. Casper, that with the fall parking study that there were no new, at least you said 3 blocks, right, or 3 streets area, you're like, to be considered during this time?
There are new areas to be considered, and we will be engaging with those neighborhoods actually tomorrow and next week. And then we will start bringing forward information to our mobile GR Commission for consideration and recommendation to allow any residents from those community meetings to be able to come and speak at mobile GR Commission, and then in follow-up, any recommendations that may be made by mobile GR Commission to this body, then those residents again will have an opportunity to speak either in support or against.
So that will be shared before the final vote.
That is correct.
Okay. I think that is I think for me, this was something that we've been doing since 2017. I think it's a good practice. I appreciate the times of the day that it's done. And, for me, that is a key element. I think, again, parking connotates a lot of different feelings. I joked about some of the feelings that I have sometimes in front of my home, but I have a very long driveway that could probably fit 4 cars if I really worked at it. And I only have 2 cars. And I also think, again, bringing in other aspects of our city dashboard as it relates to our overall climate reduction goals that we have for a city, our community-wide goal, the goal that we have for the city. Just as there is an increase in the cost of housing, the quite expensive nature to purchase a vehicle, the things that we're doing on a pilot piece with the car share program. I know they feel like little notches here and there, but I think they are reflective of an overall strategy to try to be better stewards of our entire environment. So thank you for that. So I'll be anxiously waiting to see what those neighborhoods are. Your eyes are telling me you're not going to tell me right now what those neighborhoods are. And city manager's not giving me a affirming look either, so I'm going to just say that we'll share those out, and I think those definitely neighborhoods who are very interested in how that might impact, and then having this broader conversation. So thank you.
We should be formally on the agenda with some of the neighborhood associations.
Oh, okay.
So
are there any in the second ward?
Maybe.
Okay.
So, but just to be clear, we're going to bring formally the recommendations and not share until we have the opportunity to talk with the commission as a whole, right?
That is correct, yes. We want to make sure that we're doing adequate neighborhood engagement to some of the comments that have been made today, and give the neighbors an opportunity on many different occasions to share any feedback. So whether that's speaking with staff directly at the neighborhood meetings, coming to the mobile GR Commission before any recommendations are made to this body, and then per our residential parking permit policy, it does require a public hearing. So then again, they will have an opportunity to speak during a public hearing. But I just wanted to clarify what you had said about before you vote on anything. So those would happen before or after the zoning vote.
Yep. So we would be communicated what are those areas before we would vote.
Yes.
But I think the thing to remember is that this is essentially it would essentially allow for less, it wouldn't be taking away, I guess is what I want to tell people. And so even though we wouldn't consider it, even though all those things wouldn't happen before we might make a decision on this text amendment, it would actually be preserving parking. And so I want just to make sure the public understands that as well. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. All right. So just as it stands, I guess I'll speak real quick. Of the 6 recommendations, I firmly and 100% support all of them as presented from the staff and the Planning Commission, and appreciate the work of both of those, the staff and the commission, in providing us these recommendations. In some regards, I think if I was king for the day, I'd probably go farther on a few of these. But I'm happy that the compromise is where it's at, and believe that it sets the foundation to enable some other conversations to happen about both how we continue to support housing opportunities in Grand Rapids, but also how we have to support these zoning changes when they happen, right? I think the enforcement piece is a critical component of a variety of these to ensure that the outcomes we hope to happen in a way that has the least amount of impact on a neighborhood. And so a lot of that will fall on planning and zoning and code enforcement to have to do their diligence to ensure that folks are following the rules. Two minor questions. One, as it relates to the ADUs, I think, love where the ADUs are at. I think that, getting the opportunity to do this. One of the concerns we've heard a lot about is, as it relates to short-term rentals in our community. And so I think about, I love staying in Airbnbs when I travel to other communities because I like to be in a neighborhood and I want to experience the neighborhood of another town, not just, a downtown. Often feels like a downtown no matter what city you're in. And so, I remember traveling to Austin a few years ago and staying in an ADU behind a single-family rental house or a single-family home, and really getting to experience a really cool and unique neighborhood. And then thinking about our complaint that we have unenforced policy around short-term rentals, but if an ADU is part of a single-family home that is owner-occupied, can that ADU then be used as a short-term rental with then hopefully maybe a follow-up from the city that we'll have better and stronger enforcement? So again, having those as a component of the solution. If a ADU is not a second unit, it's an accessory dwelling unit, not to be confused with a 2-unit property. To me, it would speak to the idea that an ADU could be a short-term rental. And again, provide that context where we could have that amenity in our community while then providing a greater leverage to provide enforcement around unauthorized accessory or unauthorized short-term rentals.
So currently, the city policy is that we do not allow whole house short-term rentals.
Correct.
And back in, I want to say it was 2012, the planning department, and there was likely a few other departments that were engaged in this process, we convened a work group that included operators or individuals who wish to operate short-term rentals. And the consensus and the recommendation that was put before Planning Commission and City Commission at that time was that we do allow home sharing. So individuals that wish to take part in that experience can short-term rent one room within an owner-occupied dwelling. So that's the current state. There has not been a desire for that to shift up until this point. I think that there has been monitoring state legislation that has been proposed and failed and such. And obviously the concern being is that if we allow for residential units, whole house units, to be rented on a short-term basis, that is a commercial use in a residential district, which in the past has not been something that the neighborhoods have desired. And also, it takes that housing unit away from permanent long-term residents. So that's where we sit today. That's a policy decision.
I think to me, it's a question on the difference between a 2-unit property and a single-family home with an accessory dwelling unit and how you define part of the main unit, right? And again, I don't expect this question to be solved today.
Yeah.
I think it's more of an interpretation than an actual policy. But to me, it speaks to the idea that if an accessory dwelling unit, in the eyes of lending institutions and zoning code, they're not financed like 2-unit properties. They're financed as a single-family home with an accessory dwelling unit. Could, in fact, the accessory dwelling unit be considered a part of or to be able to be used as a short-term rental? And again, I think that again, as we look at short-term rentals in our community, knowing that the unintended consequences that they've had on affordability, could this be a pathway where short-term rentals could be utilized in an ADU scenario that, if we only have 9 of them in Grand Rapids right now, it's not like they're really contributing to anything at this point. So, other than that, I support everything. The only other thing, if I had my druthers, I would, if we're eliminating parking across zone districts and it's good in LDR along certain streets, why can't we just eliminate it all? And again, I'm not going to advocate for that and say that we're going to make that change today. But to me, to the reasons that you spoke about how it impacts the ability to redevelop, especially vacant lots, if we have vacant lots throughout other parts of the LDR district and potentially MDR district, eliminating those parking requirements to me would say, well, there's probably more vacant lots that exist on not linked residential streets that could get redeveloped if they had some flexibility around parking. So I think to create more units, I think that would be a change that, maybe we could consider in the future.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. So that is a discussion. I think the Planning Commission narrowed it to the traditional neighborhoods because those are in close proximity. They support goods and services or small business districts. They are serviced by transit and have different mobility options than our modern era or mid-century neighborhoods. But that particular issue is a part and a very direct part of the community master plan engagement that is forthcoming. The engagement's taken place, the recommendation is forthcoming.
Commissioner Sassi.
I just have a quick question. is, I think Commissioner Goey asked this a little bit, and maybe you too as well, Commissioner Knight, around some of the code compliance pieces. I think, thinking about the spot that we've been at with the conversations around the development center and additional supports. And so I think it would be good to have a conversation about what does implementation look like? What are supports that are needed? I think that was you, Commissioner Knight, who brought that up. Because I think as much as we're talking about what this is, what is the implementation and the execution, I think that is also of interest to our constituents. And then how do we measure? So I know some of that modeling was sort of like if everything happened in a perfect vacuum, which it never will. But I think individuals, and we've shared some of this, I think, in other arenas, but just what has been the build of, 30% and below AMI, 80%, and kind of showing what has happened in the city. Again, this is that's not us doing that, but trying to, again, paint the picture of some of these things bit by bit. We obviously have the changes to brownfield now going to residential, which hopefully will open up some pieces. So again, another piece is, I think people want to be informed and be informed regularly and hear things 7 times by 7 ways about all those things that we are doing and what are the other things that are influences. So I just wanted to add those 2 pieces. Thanks.
All right. City Manager?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. So based on the feedback today, we will plan to bring forth the item on the 23rd for your consideration. And in light of the discussion today, what I will ensure is the presentation that Mr. Turkelson provided is immediately available, as well as the Q&As that we have shared prior to the briefing, or up to the briefing. And the other questions that I've heard around eviction prevention and safety and occupancy limitations, as well as a larger conversation about housing outside of zoning and parking and ADUs. Any questions we develop will be supplemental to what we post, and that way the public can have what you have now immediately available to them, and we'll work on those other questions and responses over the next couple of days. But I appreciate the conversation today and the feedback.
Very good. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting at 11:35, and we'll be Economic Development Project team is at 12:30. We do have a closed session real briefly, and we'll back in here at 2 o'clock for our
Chair, we have the court liaison.
we have city court liaison meeting as well at 11:45. So we're going to go downstairs real quick in 601 and get our closed session done. Thank you, everyone.